welcome to OJ Studios. Please enjoy this week's short story Shopping for a Girl by Olivia M. Julius. Remember, voting for the next 2 short stories happen every other week. Shopping for a Girl. After a silent breakfast where no one seemed to be interested in talking, Eric was helped to the door where Linda put a pink winter jacket on him, one arm at a time. He did have trouble figuring out his zipper because of his little hands, and Linda had to zip it up for him just like if he was really a little girl. Eric wanted to try to object wearing a skirt outside of the house because of how cold it was outside, but he knew that his mother would not let him. Instead, Eric took a deep breath and stepped his first steps outdoors as a little girl. It wasn't his fault, his mother had turned him into a little girl, the night before as a punishment. Every Tuesday and Thursday he was now stuck being a girl and going to his sister's gymnastics class. Now it was time to get his new identity Madison clothes to wear. Outside it was snowing, and Eric could instantly feel his legs getting colder as he walked. But when he complained to his mom, Linda just told him that he was wearing leggings and that he would get used to the cold. Eric looked at the other 2 girls and envied them for wearing pants. Eric steadily looked around, worried that someone might say something about him, but he knew it was impossible for average people on the street to know that the little girl with his sister and his mother was him. To everyone else, Eric was just another little 8-year-old girl visiting her aunt. Eric started to head to the front seat of the family's SUV but was quickly cut off by Emily, who blocked him from getting inside. "Sorry Madison, but you're not 12 yet," she said as she sat in the front seat. "Sweet little girls like you have to sit in the back." Eric rolled his eyes as Linda opened the back door for Eric. To his dismay, he saw a pink and purple booster seat sitting there in the back seat ready for him. "I'm not sitting in a car seat," Eric said, stepping away from the car. "Oh, sweetie, you don't have a choice," Linda said. "State law says you have to be 80 pounds or heavier not to have to sit in a booster seat. You are only 63 pounds plus you're not even 5 foot tall yet, you are just a shrimp." "How do you know how much I weigh?" Eric asked, but Linda did not respond. Instead she just pointed to the booster seat. Eric sighed as he gave up and climbed into the SUV and sat down in the booster seat. He started to reach back for the seat belt, but instead, he saw Linda grabbing it and buckling him in. "There you go, Madison, you're all buckled in," Linda said, kissing Eric on his forehead. Dash! The mall was located in the neighboring town about an hour drive away. Most everyone from Eric's school hung out there on weekends and whenever school was not in session. Eric had been here 1,000 times, and he knew where everything was in the mall. Unfortunately, that meant he also knew what kind of stores a little girl would be interested in going to, and he feared that he would have to go to them. Eric watched out the window in silence as Linda drove through the mall parking lot while she talked about the shopping trip and how much fun they were going to have to do it. He was dreading the shopping trip, and he wished that he could stay at home while the other 2 shopped, but he knew that there was no way he could get out of this. Linda parked the SUV in front of the JCPenney side of the mall, but both Linda and Emily didn't get out. Instead, they continued to talk while Eric just waited, unable to get out because of the child safety locks on the back doors were on. "So what type of clothes do you want?" Emily asked, looking back at Eric from the front seat. "Boy clothes," Eric said quickly, but Linda shook her head. "Madison, you are a girl now, you must wear girls' clothes." What Emily meant was, "What type of girls' clothes would you like?" Linda asked. Eric froze for a second, not sure what he should say to his mother and his sister that would deepen his problems. Instead, Eric just said nothing and shrugged his shoulders. "Don't worry Madison, we'll get you a lot of cute clothes for you," Emily said before opening her door and letting the cold air into the warm SUV. Eric instantly could feel the cold air hit his legs, and he started to wish that he had something warmer than leggings and a skirt, but he dared not say anything about it. Linda finally opened the door after what seemed to be an eternity. Eric had already unbuckled himself and was ready to jump out of the SUV, but Linda made him stop for a second. "Now Madison, I know that you are going to be a good girl and go shopping with us without throwing a fit." Eric nodded his head, but before he could say anything, Linda stopped him. "Of course, with the fit that you threw this morning, I am afraid that I'm going to have to make sure that you don't say anything that could give you away." Eric looked up at his mother, now afraid of what she might be talking about. "I'll be good," Eric said, still watching her. "I'm sure you will." Linda said, "But just to show you that I'm serious about your punishment, I think it's time for me to change your mind to a more girly one temporarily." "Please don't," Eric begged. "Don't worry, Madison, I'll change you back when we're done at the mall. Besides, I'm only changing your mind so that if anyone asks what your name is and if you're a girl or not, you can be able to say that you're Madison and that you are a girl with no problems. Also, you will be able to cooperate with picking out and trying on your clothes so that way we can be done faster. Everything else you will control," Linda said. "So basically you're going to force me to be a girl mentally too?" Eric asked. "That's unfair." "I know, but I want to make sure that I can trust you, and if you do this and you're a good sport about it, I swear on my powers that I will never do this to you again. Unless I have your permission," Linda said, holding up her hand as if she was giving an oath of office. Eric sighed for a second as he thought about it. Since Linda did swear on her powers, she was obligated to keep by them, since she really could lose her powers if she broke her promise, and even though Linda does not use her skills that much, she would still miss them when she needed them. That meant that Linda couldn't threaten him again with turning his brain into a girl's, plus she would have no way to turn Eric back and forth into a girl. If she did, his grandmother would see to that. Plus, as he thought about it, having this option to make him more girly will be great if he needed it for the extreme circumstance. It took Eric a second to think about it before he let her put her hand on his forehead. Dash! Magic doesn't hurt most of the time. Eric could not feel anything as Linda said a few words while holding his forehead. Eric knew the spell from her using it in the past. Whenever Eric or Emily misbehaved, the spell is only good for about 2 hours after it's cast, so Eric wasn't too worried about her permanently turning his mind into a girl's mind. Once Linda was done casting the spell, Eric opened his eyes up to look at his mother. He did not feel any different, and in his head, he could still tell himself that he was Eric and that he was a 17-year-old guy. "Okay, Madison, let's test this out, okay?" Linda said calmly while taking Eric out of the van. "We'll start with an easy one. What is your name?" Linda asked. In his head Eric said Eric, but what came out of his mouth was Madison. Eric tried to say it again, but again he said Madison. So, he tried it again, this time slowly saying the word Eric, but instead, he said Madison out loud. "Okay," Linda said, putting her hand up to quiet Eric, "are you a boy or are you a girl?" Again, Eric told himself to say "I am a boy," but instead, his mouth said, "I am a girl." The spell had worked on him, and Eric felt a little relieved that this day was going to be a bit easier on him. Eric walked with both Linda and Emily hand in hand as they went to the main entrance of the mall. Eric was still afraid of going to the mall and wearing the girls' clothes, but he also was comforted by the fact that Linda had the spell on him. Eric instinctively tried to go to the arcade where he usually went, but when the girls wanted to go shopping, but he had to remind himself that he was one of the girls now and this trip was now all about him. Eric was led to the second floor of the mall where most of the kids' stores were located. Eric felt a little self-conscious wearing the skirt, but he did not show it. Instead, he just watched as they walked past old stores that he remembers going to when he was younger. They walked into a store called Emma's, which was Emily's favorite store back when she was younger. Eric still hated the store to this day, even though this is the first time going in there in a few years. Eric's eyes opened wide as he looked at the store, not only from his boy eyes but his now new girly eyes too. Eric could now see the thrill of looking at all the clothes on the racks. His now girly brain even fantasized about him wearing some of the flower girl dresses that were hanging up on the walls. "I see the spell is working on you," Linda said, putting her hands on Eric's shoulder. "Would you like to try on one of those flower girl's dresses?" Linda said, taking a pink sleeveless dress from its rack and lowering it to Eric's level. Inside, Eric was telling himself, no, but the new girly side of him was jumping up down, which since the girly side of him was stronger. Because of the spell, Eric ended up jumping up and down as he yelled yes, and before Eric even knew what was happening, the dress was in his hands and with him headed to the changing room. Dash! Emily watched as Eric disappeared into the changing room, quickly shutting the door behind him before turning to her mother. "You're mean," Emily said, trying to hold back a little bit of a snicker. Linda just smiled as she waited for her son to come back out. "I bet you can't wait until you're 18 to get your powers," she said, smiling over at her. "It does make things go easier." "Yeah, but now he's probably scared that you might change his mind into a little girl's," Emily said with a little bit of concern. "I lied," Linda admitted. All I can do to Eric is what is happening to him now. I can cast a spell that will make him say that he is a girl for 2 hours, but that is about it. You're mean, Emily said with a laugh. I wouldn't be so mean if you all studied the notes I gave you for when you get your powers, Linda said, hitting Emily with a playful hit to the arm. Dash! Eric took off his clothes and proceeded to put the dress on without the guy in him trying to object. He managed to slip the dress on himself, but then he came up with the problem he could not reach the zipper in the back so he could zip up the dress. After a few tries, he finally yelled out to Linda for help. Linda walked in only to see Eric struggling to get his hands on the dreaded zipper. Hang on Madison, don't worry, Linda said, turning Eric around in the changing room and zipping up the dress and encasing him into it. Eric did not like wearing the dress or being forced to wear it. But the girly side of him loved it, and that was the part of him that was in control right now. You look beautiful, Linda said, stepping back to examine Eric. Can you please stop this spell? Please? Eric whispered low enough so that only him and Linda could hear. I'll be good, I promise. No Madison, Linda whispered, but she stopped when she saw Eric's head drop. She sighed a little and hugged him. Look, Eric, I can't just cancel a spell like that. You will have to wait the full 2 hours, and then after that, we will see how you act and if you can be trusted not to go crazy if we put you in another dress. Okay! Eric looked up to meet his mother's gaze and slowly nodded his head. You only got an hour and a half, you can do this, she said before leading Eric outside of the changing room and into the store where Emily was waiting. Even though Eric's new girly side of his mind was mostly in control, Eric still couldn't help but notice the strangeness of the dress, or how weird it felt to walk outside the dressing room with the dress floating around his legs. Strangely, it felt quite nice. Eric shook the off the new feeling out of his head and instead let the girl part of him take over again as he walked down the small hallway connecting the dressing rooms. Looking good, Madison, Emily said as Eric slowly walked by her. Eric smiled, but only briefly. Even the girl part of him couldn't make the first walk in a dress any less scary. Dash! Eric looked up at a large clock that was placed in the middle one of the mall's large commons and counted down the 5 minutes were still remaining for the spell. So far, they visited 4 extremity girly stores, and so far, Eric was cooperating along with the girl side of him. He looked at his mother and his sister, who had their hands full of clothes just for a body that he was only going to be stuck in for a few days a week. Eric now has a whole wardrobe of girly clothes, and the only question he had was what he was going to do with all of these clothes. The next store they came across was downstairs on the main level of the mall. The store was a small sports store located in a little corner of the mall right next to an old, abandoned Sears. In the front window, mannequins were wearing different sports uniforms, and the last one was of a small girl wearing a little pink and yellow leotard. Oh no! Eric softly whispered to himself as they walked in. He looked up at the clock inside of the store and saw that he only had 2 minutes left until the spell wore off, and he was going to have to do the hardest and the worst part of the shopping trip. He was going to have to try on leotards without the spell helping him. Eric slowly walked into the store following Emily. Linda agreed to meet them at the food court in an hour, letting Eric and Emily shop for the leotards alone in the store. Eric knew this store well. It was across the hallway from the arcade, and it was the only sports-centered store in the mall. On days that Emily and his mother wanted to go shop for girly stuff, he would sneak in here and talk about football with the owners. Personally, he was a Chiefs fan while the owners were die-hard Broncos fans. But this time the trip was different. He came in kind of a stranger to the store. The owner Mike did not greet him like he normally did. But why would he? To him, Eric was just a little girl walking into the store with an older girl. Hey Emily, is Eric not here today? Mike asked from behind the counter. No, he stayed home. She said, I'm with my cousin Madison today, we're looking at leotards. Well, you know where they are, let me know if you need anything. Emily nodded a little and walked to the back, leaving Eric behind. Eric tried to waste time by looking at the different football uniforms that were hung up in wooden frames proudly along the walls of the store. Some of the best football players in history had their jerseys proudly hung up for everyone to see, and Eric could name every one of them. The spell was still active on him, and he could feel himself draw near to the little replica cheerleader uniforms that were on a low shelf. He wondered how cute he would look wearing a Rams cheer uniform and even thought about how fun it would be if he was to wear one at one of the games. Eric knew that he had to get a grip. He was not Madison, he was Eric, he should be interested in the football jerseys and team memorabilia that were on the shelves. Yet the spell overruled him. Football was too boyish and for the girl part of his brain. His mother must have put the most girly girl mind inside of him. "Come on Madison, we can look at them later," Emily said, grabbing hand and throwing him back into reality. Eric took a deep breath as he felt the spell stop working. His mind now automatically focused on the fact that he was now alone in his head. He tried to remind himself that he didn't need the spell and that he could handle whatever was to come his way. To calm himself down a little, he decided to start looking around at the different life-size cardboard cutouts of different gymnasts as they stood smiling before him. All of them were wearing leotards, and most of them had gold or silver medals around their necks from the Olympics. Emily saw that Eric was looking at the cutouts. She smiled a little as she walked over to Eric and guided him over to one. "That's Gabby Douglas," Emily said, pointing at one of the cutouts. Gabby was wearing a dark red long-sleeve leotard and had 3 gold medals around her neck. She won gold at the Rio Games back in 2016 and the American Cup in Newark, New Jersey. Eric could remember Emily watching the event on the TV with her friends all squealing at once during a sleepover, but he didn't watch it. Eric watched as she pointed out many of the girls whose cutout posters were displayed. Eric was impressed that she knew who all of them were. "How do you know who all these girls are?" Eric asked, looking at the cutout of Nastia Liukin, who was wearing a bright pink long-sleeved leotard. "The same way you knew everyone on the Kansas City Chiefs," Emily said, shrugging. "When you get interested in something you find out everything you can about it." Eric nodded his head as he thought about it. He never compared her love of gymnastics with his love of football before. Emily found the rack of leotards that was Eric's size and started looking through them, occasionally taking one out to show Eric. Eric, however, was not any help and kept shaking his head no at the different options. Emily rolled her eyes and bent down. "Look, Mom told us to get you at least 8 leotards for both the class and to practice in whenever you feel like it. If you do not pick out at least 6 of them, then Mom might put that curse on you again, and she might not trust you enough to handle the classes by yourself ever," Emily said before getting up from and resuming her search through the leotards. Eric sighed a little and looked at them. He did not know the first thing about leotards or what the different styles of them meant. There was some that were sleeveless, and there was some that had little cap sleeves, and there was some that had long sleeves. Some of them were solid colors, and some were multicolored. Some were named brand and some were not. It was too much for Eric, and he just ended up picking a decent looking one. "I like this one," he said, pulling a leotard out from the rest, even though he did not have a clue how he could take it from the racks without help from Emily. The leotard did not look too girly, and it did not seem too bad for a boy who was going to be stuck as a girl. On the top was just a light blue that ended just below the chest, below that was black with blue, pink and purple colors made in what looked like a wisp of smoke. Emily took the leotard off its hanger and examined it. "It's cute, and it's your size," she said, looking it over. She turned to face Eric, and she put the leotard in front of him. "It might look cute on you. How about if you go ahead and try it on?" Emily said, putting the leotard towards Eric. Eric froze for a second, not sure what he should do. He knew that there was a changing room right behind him, but after that, he wasn't sure about how to put one on. "Oh, don't worry, it's just like putting on a swimsuit," Emily said, but that just caused Eric to freeze up more since he didn't know how to put on a swimsuit either. "Just find the front, put your legs in the leg holes and pull it all the way up," Emily said as she took Eric to the dressing room. "You'll figure it out, it's self-explanatory," she said, shoving the leotard into Eric's hands. Eric looked down at the leotard as he turned around to the changing room. Dash! Eric locked the changing room door and looked down at the leotard. He had seen his sister wear them countless times ever since she was old enough to do a simple cartwheel, but he never thought that he would be wearing his own leotard. Eric took off his clothes and stood there naked as he tried to figure out what side of the leotard was the front. He switched the leotard around in his hands as he looked at it. Finally, he figured it out and stepped one shaky foot inside of the leotard followed by the other. He grabbed hold of the leotard and pulled it up to his chest where he put his arms through the armholes. He looked down feeling somewhat accomplished that he was able to put on the leotard. He looked at himself in the full-sized mirror and smiled to himself. For the first time since waking up in the morning, he felt like he was ready to do anything. Emily patiently waited for Eric to emerge wearing his new leotard. She had told her mother that she could figure out a way to convince Eric to wear girl clothes without the use of magic, and she couldn't wait to prove to her mother that she was right. "Are you ready?" Eric asks through the door. Emily smiled as she stepped a small step back. "Come on out!" she yelled out. Eric opened the door slightly to peek outside. He looked around for a second and then opened the door the rest of the way so that his sister could see him. "Aw Madison, the leotard looks so adorable on you," Emily said as she bent down to make a few adjustments to it. Eric felt weird wearing it, especially since Emily said that he looked adorable in it. He also felt an awkward feeling that he should be wearing some type of pants or something to cover his legs with it. "Well, it fits you, Madison," Emily said as she continued to look him over. "Do you want it?" Eric shyly nodded his head yes, mostly so he could get out of the store faster. "Good, now get back in your clothes so we can pick out some more," Emily said. Before Eric was quickly turned back around by Emily, he caught a glimpse of Emily's basket where he spotted 3 other leotards laying there that was his size, and they were all different shades of pink. It took about a half hour before Eric could convince Emily that he liked 7 other really girly leotards before Emily agreed to check out. Eric was celebrating in his head the fact that soon the shopping trip would be over. But to his dismay, Emily stopped in a section of the store with girls' hair bows. Eric moaned a little as Emily looked through the small selection of hair bows. All he wanted to do was just leave, but Emily forced him to look at the hair bows. "You need to get some bows for your hair," Emily said as she picked out a hair bow that had the Kansas City Chiefs logo on it. "No," Eric said, but Emily didn't listen to him and put it in her handbasket along with other girly colors that Emily claimed would look great with his other leotards and outfits. Finally, Emily was ready to leave with Eric, praying that no other surprises were waiting for him. Eric watched as Emily gave the cashier Linda's credit card, and in a few short moments they were finally outside of the shop and headed to the food court.